Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Marcia Avedon. Marcia is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resource, Marketing, and Communications Officer of Trane Technologies. In her role, Marcia helped oversee the spin-out of Ingersoll Rand and the rebranding of Trane, which is often ranked among the best places for women to work and for diversity more broadly. Previously, she served as the CHRO of Merck & Company. Marcia also serves on the board of directors of Generac Power Systems and previously served on the board of directors of GCP Applied Technologies, Lincoln Financial, and the Center for Creative Leadership. Marcia, thank you very much for joining us. We always love having you here on campus.
It's great to be here, Anthony. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
You just have gone through this very successful CEO transition. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the things that you think are key ingredients into making that happen?
Well, we were very fortunate in that we were grooming Dave Regnery, who's our new CEO, for many years. In fact, he's been with the company his entire career. So I have known him for 15 years that I've been with the company and seen him get progressively more responsibilities, different businesses, different challenges. And I think the companies that do CEO succession really well, it's very intentional and planful development of internal candidates. Ideally, you have internal candidates. And so one of the things I'm proud of is just seeing over the years leaders like Dave develop, whether it's for the CEO or for other roles, and being just so thoughtful about those experiences. I mean, he'd done an overseas assignment, he'd done turnarounds, he's done businesses that were high growth. So by the time he emerged as the candidate that was first COO and then CEO, he had seen such a wide set of experiences and challenges that we knew he was ready.
And part of the transition, generally speaking, as the CEO needs to work with that executive leadership team. And are there substantial differences between a CEO that comes from the outside to work with that executive leadership team versus someone who, as you've described, has had such a long and storied history within the company?
Well, I've been fortunate because I've done multiple CEO successions, and in all of those cases, they've been internal. The only time I've done an external was when we were doing a spin-off, and we decided not to elevate the internal division president. We went outside and got an external CEO who had already been a public company CEO. So that's my one experience in terms of external, as well as when I was on a board of directors. We brought in an outside CEO. I do think there's some differences. I think people that are from the inside obviously have the advantage of knowing the company, the people, the strategies, and that's both a strength, but it also can be a watch out that will they make the change that might be necessary to achieve the next level of performance in the company. But generally you get a running start if you're from the inside, and you usually have a lot of stakeholder support already, where someone from the outside has to build all that stakeholder support and probably has a little bit more of a learning curve. But in the case of Allegion, where we did the spin-off of our security business, it's been very, very successful since 2013, so it's been a really long run. And Dave Petraeus has been the CEO the whole time, and I was involved with selecting him. So I think either one can work. I think it just depends on what the business needs and what the challenges or the profile is that's best for the strategy of the company.
And you mentioned that you have served on boards, of course, but you're still one of the fairly few women, or not enough women, at least relative to the proportion of the total board that serves on boards. Is there something that we should be doing better to get more women into those positions?
And board of directors? Yeah, I'm actually speaking on Thursday at something called 50-50, which is all about that exact goal of how do you have gender parity on boards of directors. And the good news is the data that just came out shows we are making progress. So the numbers are going up. It's been slow, but the percentage of boards now that at least have one woman is the vast majority now. Now, we're still far, far from having gender parity. I'm super proud of Train Technologies Board, where I'm the head of HR, because we actually have 5 women directors on our board out of 12 independent directors. So we're not quite at parity, but we're getting awfully close. I actually think in terms of women and underrepresented minorities, we're starting to see momentum in terms of director positions. I sometimes worry that we might fall into sort of tokenism. Well, now we have 1, we're okay, or now we have 2 and we're okay. I think one of the other good things that has happened, Anthony, is boards used to always look for CEOs or former CEOs to be directors. Well, the minute you do that, the number of women and underrepresented minorities becomes a very, very small data set, unfortunately. So now that boards are looking for different profiles with different types of skills, it opens up many more candidates and often more diverse candidates. So that's encouraging as well. The board I'm on, Generac, for example, there are 2 women on the board, and we're going through a search for our next director, looking at the skills and requirements, but we really would like to get an underrepresented minority on the board, but we want someone with a certain set of experiences. So it's that combination, but if you set the skill requirements too narrow, you're not going to get as diverse a pool.
So many questions I have about that very one. But do you find that boards are going to be more, do you think they'll be more successful when they're not just from the diversity perspective, but really focusing on skills rather than kind of prior titles?
Absolutely. As the world gets more complex, as businesses are challenged with new things every day we never anticipated, like right now we're all going through these supply chain challenges. We happen to have on the Generac board a woman who ran integrated supply chain for some of the big businesses in General Electric. And so not only is she a great overall director and leader, she actually knows that discipline well and can advise the business there on some of the things that are going on related to supply chain. So I think boards are better the more diverse they are in every sense of the word, from skills, experiences, industry, as well as race and gender and other aspects of diversity.
And you mentioned one of the concerns that, as you're absolutely right, of course, that most companies now, at least the major companies, have at least 1 woman on the board. But the concern about tokenism, do you find that there is a threshold by which women that you've seen can be more effective when they're on the board? So where I'm really going with that is we've seen some research that indicates that once you need at least 3 women, really, for them to kind of on average to feel comfortable really expressing themselves. But you're obviously on a board, you mentioned it's 2, and you're a very strong leader.
I'm not so shy, right?
Yeah.
The 2 women on the Generac board, myself, one of them, and the other, are both fairly vocal in the boardroom. So I would say in terms of participating, leaning in, and having done our homework, etc. I don't see it, given it's only 2, I don't see that as an issue, really, for us as individuals. I think it would be harder if I were the only woman. It might be harder. It's hard to know. I've been on 3 different boards. I was never the only woman, so I don't know what that would be like. In the Train Technologies boardroom, the 5 women we have are all so different. Their backgrounds are different. The committees they serve on differ, and what they bring to the party differs. And so that's kind of interesting too to see, and even stylistically they're different from one another. So I think, I guess the word is intersectionality, right? Diversity is not just one dimension such as gender. How someone interacts in the boardroom is a function of all of those different dimensions.
And you were talking about the boards being more intentional about specific skills. Is HR background, is that one of those skills that would be beneficial for most boards?
So absolutely, yes. And I've been thrilled to get a number of calls in recent years by recruiters looking for chief HR officers, or at least people who have very strong HR backgrounds. I think more and more it's becoming one of the skills that boards look at. But it's interesting, they also want industry knowledge. They also want business strategy knowledge. For me, having done a lot of mergers and acquisitions, that's often very attractive to boards. So it's often the HR skill set and fit in some other ways with what that particular board is looking for. It's been interesting. Industry knowledge seems to be important for the board searches that I've been involved with.
So they want good CHROs.
That's right. Broad CHROs. People that are business people first and can be a great director and happen to know HR. And often they'll say, we don't want people just because they're going to serve on the compensation committee or something like that. We want them to be complete full board member, which is what you would want as a director anyway.
And you mentioned mergers and acquisitions, and of course you've been through a few that were pretty substantial, and most recently when Trane both spun off, Ingersoll ran, and then went on its own that way. Can you describe a little bit about what HR's role ought to be in such processes?
Yeah, I'm actually speaking to the students today about this, and I'm really excited to talk about it because I really believe very strongly that HR needs to be involved from the very beginning in inception of a potential transaction all the way through the integration. At Trane Technologies, I sit on the Mergers and Acquisitions Committee where we're looking at the pipeline of potential deals that we might do, acquisitions, other types of joint ventures and deals. And it's amazing how many times people-related, culture-related items come up. I'm just making this up, but examples like, oh, their largest factory is unionized and they had a strike last year, that's a risk. Or there's a founder CEO, do you think we can keep him or not keep him? Or, at the very beginning of whether a deal is a good deal, there's people and cultural issues. And then, of course, all the research shows, 70–80% of deals don't return their cost of capital. And if you go under that, why? It's often issues with the integration, cultural differences, retention of key talent, et cetera. So I feel very strongly that HR needs to play a very big leadership role from the beginning of the inception of a deal all the way through integration.
And now turning to kind of lessons from the pandemic and HR's role in it and stuff, what do you take away from this if we can get past it eventually?
I said to people 2020 was the hardest year of my career, and then 2021 came. So it's gotten harder, actually. I think 2020 HR really rose to the occasion, I think, as a field, as leaders. We managed not only to keep people healthy and safe by things like allowing tons of remote work and other protocols to keep people safe in factories and other places, and reinvented the way work was really being done and way leaders would lead, and training and development was totally virtual. I mean, we did so many different things. Some cases we had to do things that were very challenging, like furloughs or to just get through the economics. So it seemed like 2020 was going to be the hardest ever, and then we'd be coming out of it, and here we are. We're sitting together in November of 21, and we're not out of it. And so now the issues of mental health and keeping the workforce resilient and higher levels of turnover. Last year we didn't see a lot of turnover because people were just hunkered down and trying to stay safe. Now people are like, I'll interview you virtually, I don't care, you can work from home, etc. So the war for talent is harder. I think keeping people engaged is harder. It's just, in some ways, people are worn down by the pandemic and it's tiring. So as HR leaders, how do you keep the workforce engaged? How do you keep leaders leading in a way that's inspirational during a pandemic? It's very challenging, but I feel like HR has been at the fore, and I think we've been very innovative across companies of ways to keep the company productive and meeting its goals, but also be, in some ways, much more empathetic with employees and more creative on how to support employees.
So it's really interesting to me that you highlighted that kind of the initial real challenges were somehow not easy in any stretch at all, but but it's more the sustainability afterwards that's even harder than those first emergency issues. Is that right?
Yeah, and I guess I'm an ultimate optimist, so I do think there's some silver lining. I think our ability to realize that virtual work actually is productive and effective has been I think, a big aha. And now how far you want that to go differs in different companies, different types of work. But I think the world has realized that digital tools enable effective virtual work and teamwork and so forth. So there's silver lining. I also think that issues with mental health and well-being were always there, and now they've come to the fore as something that leaders and great organizations need to acknowledge, address stigma, provide support resources. I think they've become more acute during the pandemic, but they were always there. And now we've sort of allowed people to talk about it, which I think is really important. So there are some positives in all of this. In terms of sustainability, I think we're all trying to figure out what will be the new normal. We're a real believer that it's going to be a hybrid kind of environment for people that used to be office workers. But we have half our workforces in manufacturing, and then a lot of technicians who work in customer sites on equipment, and they can't be virtual, right? So we have to make flexibility something that makes sense for everyone, not just for the privileged people who used to be in offices. So we've been thinking really hard about what does flexible work mean in a manufacturing environment? Is it having more say in your schedule? Is it not requiring people to do overtime and give them 24 hours notice, right? Like, how do you make their needs for a positive work-life environment respected? And that's hard. It's hard in running an effective business.
And so does that tie into, you mentioned earlier that some of what maybe companies have learned through here is a need for more empathy for employees. Does that all tie in there?
Absolutely, absolutely. More empathy, more respect for people's needs outside of work. We have talked about allowing people to thrive at work and at home, and how do you do that as a leader, as a company, and making that real for people, regardless of what type of setting they're in or what their arrangement is in terms of where they work. And I think we're on a journey in industry about that.
So you also talked about turnover coming up, and that, of course, raises the question about what many people seem to be referring to as the Great Resignation at this point. Do you think that exists? Is that a real thing?
People need to make a living. So I don't think people are, that slogan, the Great Resignation, almost has a tone to it that people are just going home and putting their feet up and eating bonbons or something. And I don't think that's what's happening. I don't think people are opting out of work to a large degree. Of course, during the pandemic, people did who were sick or at risk of being sick. But now I think it's a little different than that. I think people are reevaluating where they want to work and how they want to work. And so companies that are seen as not progressive, not flexible, I think are going to lose talent. And then I also think the pandemic, the heartache of the pandemic, I think had a lot of people doing soul searching about where do I want to live? Do I want to work the hours that I'm working? Perhaps I want to work part-time. We've seen a lot of women, unfortunately, either leave the workforce or cut back on their hours, and because of childcare or elder care responsibilities. I find that disappointing because we're making progress and making work-life effective for women. So I'm hoping that's a temporary change. So I think there's a lot of dynamics, but I don't think it's people are just opting out. And I think people are learning the grass isn't always greener. Other companies that someone might go look at are going to have some of the same challenges in terms of how do you make hybrid or flexible work effective, and I think certainly within certain industries it's not going to be that different in different companies. So I think we'll see a lot of job hopping for a while, and then I think it may slow down a little bit.
Does that suggest that it's something more like a great sorting or a great choice, that people are going to be trying to find what fits them best? And then would that tie into what you were talking about, the need for organizations to understand what flexible work might mean for each person, and that empathy, et cetera?
I believe so. I had breakfast with students today, and one of the students said her job that she just is accepted coming out of the master's program here is going to be fully virtual. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. You're entering a new company as a new graduate and you're going to be fully virtual. What will that experience be like? And maybe it's my generation, but my bias is it will be harder to make relationships. It could be harder to move up and advance, but maybe that's an old paradigm, and maybe I'm not with the current paradigm. But I do wonder whether the work experience of fully virtual will be significantly different than the work experience of either hybrid or on-site most of the time. We just did a survey at Train Technologies, and we have 4 different arrangements in the company, from on-site, hybrid, virtual within our geography, and then fully remote. And we asked people, questions about engagement. And at this point, there is not any difference, but they haven't fully gone into those new arrangements. But they know where they're going, so it'll be interesting. So I do think this sorting, as you called it, Anthony, the nature of the work, the arrangement is a factor, is a piece of it for sure. I also think location. A lot of people moved during pandemic because they're virtual anyway, and they went to wherever their preferred location is. So I think that's a factor as well.
I'm definitely of the same paradigm that you described yourself being of. So it's hard for me to imagine being fully virtual also.
I think collaboration, creative kinds of activities, and even really sensitive coaching and individual one-on-one activities, at least some of the time, I believe you have a different life experience face-to-face than you do through a digital screen. I know myself, there's certain conversations I just feel like I'd like to have with someone face-to-face.
For sure, absolutely. Another one of the things that have come out of the pandemic has been that it seems like almost every issue becomes really polarized in the country, and
yeah.
and a clamoring of employees in many places for companies to take a position on one issue and on both sides of that issue, depending on which employees and where they are. What is an organization's role in terms of trying to navigate some of these issues, societal issues?
We always talk about what are sort of our filters of where the company should or shouldn't speak out. I have, in addition to HR responsibilities, I have communications and public affairs under me as well. And, the question about when we want the CEO or someone else on the executive team to do an interview or to be public or write a piece, and why we would sign on to a coalition or something like that is something I get involved with quite often. I think there's really like 3 big filters we use. The easy one is it's relevant to our business and to our shareholders' expectations and making our commitments financially. So obviously if something's going to affect, something directly related to our products or our services or, how we make money, we're going to weigh in on that. We're going to try to lobby or influence on something like that. That's sort of the first hurdle. The second one is something that we feel like culturally is really important and core to who our company is. And so, for example, there's a lot of things related to sustainability. We're a company that's, our purpose is based on sustainability. And if we feel like there's something that we want to speak out on that we might not directly benefit financially as a company, but we think it's better for the planet and better for the world, we'll speak out on that. And we just had people at COP26 speaking on climate-related items is a good example where we'll speak out in the world. And then sometimes there are things that our employees really feel strongly about. And this is where it gets challenging from an HR standpoint, because with large companies, you have employees, as you point out, all over the spectrum of points of view. But there are some things, particularly in the diversity and inclusion space, where we've said we want to lead as a company in diversity and inclusion. And if we think there's a need to speak out related to racial inequality or gender equity or something along that line, again, even if it doesn't directly affect our company, but there's a movement within our company and it's consistent with our principles and our values, we will speak out. And we did, obviously, with the horrific murder of George Floyd and the other tragedies last year, but even on other diversity and inclusion matters related to for example, were signatories on the Paradigm for Parity and made a commitment to have gender equality by 2030 in our leadership ranks. So that's a very public statement, and that's an example where we're doing it because we think it's all three. It's good for our company, it's good for the world, and we feel like it's the right thing to do for humanity. So sometimes it's all three.
And I see the students starting to line up to see you. So the last question I would like to ask you is about kind of the interaction between organizations and universities. So you are, of course, a super successful business person, and you have a Ph.D. So where do you think, if you do think that there is a role for universities and corporations to interact together?
Absolutely. I was taught the notion of the scientist practitioner model, and I really believe in it. And I think that practitioners who interface with faculty like yourself, with academics, we can help you identify areas of research that we think would make an impact in practice in the world. And the reverse is true too. We can have more evidence-based, more scientifically based interventions and practices within our organizations. And then obviously there's the collaboration for the next generation of talent coming into the workforce. So today I'm speaking with students. Hopefully I'm bringing them some new perspectives, and hopefully some of them will be attracted to our company. So I think we have a lot of mutual interests, whether it's collaborative research, whether it's internships, whether it's helping in the classroom, and then also advising on research and other things. We collaborate on the Center on Executive Succession, which is a great example of an area that's lots of opinions, but there hadn't been that much really good research. And I love that the university took that on and said we can make that practice better, we can learn more together, both the companies that are part of that center as well as the academic great research and work that's being done.
Thank you very much for that answer and for joining us here. We really appreciate having you down here.
My pleasure, Anthony. Thank you so much.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Marcia Avedon of Train Technologies shared her views regarding the role of HR in driving business success. She also shared some thoughts on how HR plays a critical role in mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, and the critical role that HR must play in driving a more inclusive workplace. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.